Hello and welcome to this edition of a World Panorama, where we get a complete roundup of the biggest international stories that made the headlines this week. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor. First up, a look at this week's top headlines. Inter-Korean summit kickstarts stalled nuclear talks after meeting visiting South Korean President Moon Jae-in in Pyongyang. North leader Kim Jong-Un says ready to dismantle key missile facility and main nuclear complex. Korea has also signed agreement on reducing military tensions. US-China trade war escalates as both sides announce their broadest waves of tariffs yet. US hits a $200 billion worth of Chinese goods with new tariffs. China retaliates with the tariffs on US goods worth $60 billion. Measures to come into effect from 24th of September. Bhutan's ruling People's Democratic Party of Sharing Tobgay ousted in first round of polls. Newcomer party DNT gets the top spot to face off with the second-ranked DPT in the second and final round polls on 18th of October. An international criminal court initiates a preliminary investigation into alleged crimes against Rohingyas. Myanmar questions ICC's jurisdiction to investigate. ICC retorts alleged crime of deportation happened partly in Bangladesh, which is a member of the court. The North-South bonhomie was on display as South Korean President Moon Jae-in travelled to Pyongyang this week for his third meeting this year with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And after their meeting, the two leaders signed the September Pyongyang Declaration, which has been lauded as a new era of peace. However, doubts remain on how this summit will be able to inject fresh momentum into the stalled nuclear negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang, with little clarity on what the process of denuclearization would entail. Take a look at this report.
A summit that ended with a promise of turning the nuclear peninsula into a land of peace without nuclear weapons and nuclear threats. The leaders of North and South Korea, Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, met again this week, the third summit this year, ostensibly with the goal of moving the peninsula the share towards denuclearization. After the talks, Kim Jong-un pledging to work towards complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, promising to dismantle a missile engine test site and a launch pad, and a conditional offer to shut down his country's main nuclear complex at Yongbyon. Declaring they had made a major step forward towards peace, Moon and Kim stood side by side as they announced their agreement.
South and North Korea agreed on a denuclearization plan for the first time. It is a very meaningful outcome. The North has decided to permanently abolish the Tongchang-ri engine test site and missile launches with the attendance of experts from relevant countries.
김 위원장은 가까운 시일 안에 서울을 방문하기로 했습니다.
The September Pyongyang Declaration covered a number of topics. Besides denuclearization, it talks of economic development, resolving family separation issues and furthering cultural exchanges. The two Koreas' defense chiefs also adopted a separate military pact, according to which the neighbors will halt border drills from November 1st and stop military flights in the vicinity of demarcation line.
We adopted a military pact to end a history of brutal and tragic confrontation and hostility, and agreed to make efforts to turn the Korean Peninsula into a land of peace without nuclear weapons and nuclear threats.
Both leaders also vowed to work together to try and host Summer Olympics in 2032, Kim also promising to visit Seoul soon. However, analysts say the joint statement the Korean leaders issued on Wednesday was short on specifics and new information. North Korea said it would dismantle a missile engine test facility and launch pad, a promise it had already made in June. It also said it was willing to dismantle country's Yongbyon nuclear complex That promise contained a big condition only if United States take unspecified corresponding measures first. It's unclear what corresponding steps North Korea wants from the US. The joint statement also fails to give a solid step-by-step timeline for closing its nuclear facility or an agreement to allow international inspectors to assess progress or discover violations, major steps Washington had been looking for.
We will try hard to build a new peaceful relationship between the US and North Korea and resume sincere talks immediately so that North Korea can move forward with denuclearization and corresponding measures from the US can be enforced.
All said and done, the third inter-Korean summit sets stage for the US to reciprocate peace moves. The US says it's ready to immediately restart stalled negotiations with North Korea about nuclear disarmament. US President Donald Trump, welcoming the agreements, called them tremendous progress. However, the question is whether it will be enough for Trump to pick up where Moon has left off. North Korea and the United States have yet to agree on a definition of nuclearization. There is also lack of clarity on what further steps US would be willing to take to encourage North Korean action on denuclearization. Analysts in US point out that when it comes to the process of denuclearization, Kim regime continues to put the onus on the United States to take appropriate, though unspecified, measures first. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
All right, to discuss more of this, we have with us Professor Swaran Singh, who is a Professor Diplomacy and Disarmament at JNU. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here. So speaking about this inter-Korean summit that has happened this week, of course, there is a declaration that was signed at the end of the summit. Do you think a breakthrough really has been reached on the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula?
I think it depends on what makes you see breakthrough in this 3-day-long third summit. On denuclearization, if you see that the two back-to-back visits by Secretary of State Pompeo had led to a dead-end kind of a situation, now Kim Jong-un talking about desire to denuclearize and in fact sending a message through Moon Jae-in to revive the dialogue, and Secretary of State of US should visit Pyongyang. I think in that sense it is a pragmatic step forward in denuclearization. But being too much ambitious is perhaps misplaced, because in the history of disarmament, countries always give up things that are already useless for them. So the two major clinchers of this meeting, for example, of closing the missile machine test site and Taichung launch site,
yes,
are already useless, because North Korea has moved from the liquid fuel rockets to solid fuel rockets.
Yes.
So that's in conformity with how historically disarmament agreements happen. But the second element of that tradition is missing, because there has to be reciprocity. And Kim has already indicated that some unspecified but reciprocal gesture from United States has to happen. And if I can guesstimate what could those be, one is to revive this conversation of signing the peace treaty, and of also giving specific promises of aid and investment in North Korea, because that is the whole purpose of Kim's strategy to develop nuclear deterrence, then to use it for economic development. And that seems to be in court of United States, which, as you know, is already entangled for a fairly long time with Russia and now increasingly with China.
True.
So I think United States may not be actually in position to take the dialogue forward at the pace that at least Kim Jong-un is indicating. But clinchers and I think breakthroughs are much more in the bilateral relationship between two Koreas. And on top of it, I think, is the border agreement to reduce tensions on the border. If you recall last year, the ratcheting up and the firepower being displayed. And now they have specifically mentioned of creating not just the DMZ, but buffers within DMZ, land and both sea borders. And 11 guard posts are to be removed. That's a major decision. And both have also agreed to ease the process of families meeting each other. That's a very important gesture. And Moon Jae-in has also promised to build much more infrastructure in North Korea. They are talking of reconstructing, reviving, repairing the roads that connect two Koreas, talk of even rail links.
Right.
So I think at bilateral level, it's a much more concrete breakthroughs that one can notice. In case of denuclearization, it's only gestures at this stage.
So where does this denuclearization process go from here? Because obviously the ball is in America's court, but there is still no clarity on what really this denuclearization means, because obviously it means different things to different people and different nations. There's still a lack of clarity on how that is going to happen, what is the process involved. So where does US go from here as far as the issue of denuclearization is concerned?
Aishwarya, you have actually explained what the complexity is. Because all major stakeholders actually have both imaginations which are different, and they see outcomes impacting them very differently. So major players like Japan and China who are engaged, China is constantly sort of training and talking to Kim Jong-un.
Yes.
You see the Japanese Prime Minister repeatedly visiting White House. They see different outcomes meaning different things for them. But at base of it, once having developed a nuclear deterrence that can reach as far as United States, North Korea cannot be expected to just show philanthropy and just give it away.
Right.
There has to be some quid pro quo. And I think one possibility being talked about is peace treaty and extension of nuclear umbrella to give security guarantees. And how will that be seen in Japan? How will that be seen in China? And that's what makes it really complex. And the fact that United States, as you just said, not in position now to pursue at the pace that Kim Jong-un is indicating the desire to take,
yes,
would take, I think, certain amount of time. I'm not sure if the promised peace treaty before end of this year would be coming up. It doesn't look like United States will be able to deliver that part. So it looks like Kim Jong-un is really the smarter of the lot here. He's projecting himself to be a very, very sensible leader who's willing to pursue with patience dialogue with the United States. So if anyone has achieved a great deal, it's Kim Jong-un.
Absolutely.
And I think the brain behind the whole exercise is Moon Jae-in in that sense. So I think the two Korean leaders are the main drivers of the process at this stage.
Absolutely. So Korean talks have made a certain progress, of course, and this because this declaration was really a positive for Pyongyang's relations with the international community, especially with Washington. And obviously, Washington will, of course, use this momentum to set up a second meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump. But of course, as you just mentioned, hard work really remains for US negotiators on how they progress with the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. Thank you so much, Professor Singh, for joining and sharing your perspective on this entire story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And on to the other big story this week. The trade war between the United States and China just got a lot bigger after both sides announced their broadest waves of tariffs yet. The US imposed tariffs of 10% on $200 billion in Chinese goods, and China retaliated by putting tariffs on $60 billion in the US goods. Of course, the latest exchange of fire means that the two economic superpowers will soon have imposed tariffs on more than $360 billion of goods, and analysts say that this battle is likely to get worse.
US President Donald Trump has imposed fresh tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods as it escalates its trade war with Beijing. The taxes will reportedly take effect from 24th September, starting at 10% and increasing to 25% from the start of next year. The higher import taxes will apply to almost 6,000 items, marking the biggest round of US tariffs so far. Handbags, rice and textiles will be included, but some items expected to be targeted, such as smartwatches and high chairs, have been excluded. The announcement came after China confirmed to have received an invitation from the US for holding trade negotiations. In a tweet, Trump said the latest round of tariffs was in response to China's unfair trade practices. He also warned Beijing against seeking to influence the upcoming US midterm elections.
China's been taking advantage of the United States for a long time, and that's not happening anymore. We can't let that happen. I have a great relationship with President Xi. He's a friend of mine, but we can't, I've been telling him we can't let it happen. So we may make a deal at some point, but right now we just imposed $200 billion at 25%. It just went on. It actually kicks in on January 1st at 25%. It starts off at 10%, but shortly thereafter goes to 25%.
Trump's latest imposition on Chinese imports was quickly followed by China's retaliation. China also hit back at US by imposing new trade tariffs on $60 billion of American goods. The latest imposition targeted American goods such as liquefied natural gas, which are produced in states loyal to the US president. The Chinese Commerce Ministry said it would impose its tariffs from September 24th, the date the US duties come into effect, but at lower rates than previously expected. It will place an additional 5% in duty on US products, including smaller aircraft, computers and textiles, and an extra 10% on goods such as chemicals, meat, wheat and wine.
The US on one hand clamors for talks, but on the other hand imposes tariffs. On one hand, it sent out an invitation for negotiation. On the other, it followed up by putting on extreme pressure. This pattern of doing things has become a convention for the US. For China, this US routine is a clear as flame, and we'll handle the situation calmly. I want to emphasize that firstly, the United States' threat, intimidation and blackmail won't work on China. China will continue to promote reform and opening up in accordance with its own timetable and in its own way protect the country's legitimate rights.
Earlier, Trump also threatened to raise the stakes again if Beijing retaliate, adding a further $257 billion in Chinese imports to the target list. That would raise the total to $517 billion, covering nearly everything China sells the United States. At the same time, the administration said it is still open to negotiations with China.
And if there's a retaliation against our farmers and our industrial workers, our ranchers, if any of that goes on, we're going to kick in another $257 billion. And that'll be also at 25%, which we don't want to do, but we probably will have no choice. So we'll see what happens, but we're making a lot of headway with China. China wants to come over and talk, and we are always open to talking.
The latest round of US duties marks the third set of tariffs put into motion so far this year. In July, the White House increased charges on $34 billion worth of Chinese products. Then last month, the escalating trade war moved up a gear when the US brought in a 25% tax on a second wave of goods worth $16 billion. This latest round means that about half of all China's imports to the US are now subjected to the new duties. Unlike the earlier rounds, the list also targets consumer goods such as luggage and furniture. This means households may start to feel the impact from higher prices. Economists expect Chinese growth to take a hit of 0.5 to 0.6% points in 2019 if tariffs are raised to 25% on January 1st, as the US has announced. The tit-for-tat measures are the latest escalation in an increasingly protracted trade dispute between the world's two largest economies. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And another big story this week is Bhutan's third general election. The country's first round elections threw up a surprise result by voting out the ruling People's Democratic Party of Prime Minister Tshering Tobgay. While a relatively new party, which was formed in 2013, the DNT, won the first place. The DNT will now square off with the opposition DPT on 18th of October for the final round. The first round result, however, is seen as a major upset in an election being closely watched both by India and China.
The Bhutanese people have voted for change, voting out the incumbent. The ruling People's Democratic Party, PDP, of PM Tshering Tobgay found itself at the third position, while the Druk Nyamrup Shokpa, a relatively new party which was formed in 2013, won first place, getting 92,722 votes out of 2,91,098 total. The opposition, Druk Phensum Shokpa, was a close second with 90,020 votes. The two top parties, the DNT and DPT, will square off on October 18 for the final round. The left-of-centre DNT, which pulled off the surprise win in the first round, is led by surgeon-turned-politician Lotte Schering, whose campaign platform comprised developmental issues, particularly health access and facilities. These, according to analysts, struck a chord with voters, especially in the rural areas.
Bhutanese politics is undergoing a big change because the incumbent party has been defeated and a new party has come to the fore. DPT, another party which was in government earlier, has also done well. So whatever it is indicative of that the Bhutanese people want a change.
Bhutan transitioned to a democracy in 2007 when it held its first parliamentary elections. This year, unlike in 2013 when India had cut fuel subsidies to Bhutan, this time India was not a factor in the election campaign even after the Doklam issue shook both the countries last year. But Doklam also brought home to India that it cannot take relations with Bhutan for granted. While India had an excellent relations with the ruling People's Democratic Party of Prime Minister Tshering Tokbe, it will be a different party in the centre now. Earlier, when DPT was in power between 2008 and 2013, India was wary of its Prime Minister Jigme Thinley's interest in building ties with China.
What we have to assess is whether this change is related to Bhutan's relations with China. Because we have had this Doklam issue last year and there is in my view, China's purpose in the Doklam issue was to shake Bhutan, and they have succeeded. They have been successful in creating a situation where the people of Bhutan are asking themselves, why are we involved in this?
There has been some disquiet in India, which has traditional links with the small country, over the defeat of Tokbe, with whom it had close ties, with China trying to make inroads into the small country. However, analysts believe the close ties between India and Bhutan will continue and that any winning party would have the blessings of the king. Experts say maturing democracy in Bhutan is a positive sign.
It is the third election in a system which the king still has a lot of influence. Right. The monarchy has a lot of influence in that society. The monarchy is very clear that they are with India on foreign policy issues.
Irrespective of which party wins the final round on 18th of October, it is clear that with China looking to forge close ties with Bhutan, despite India's traditional friendship with the country, India has to chart out its own course in international affairs. Akhilesh Suman's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
The International Criminal Court has launched a preliminary investigation into deportations of hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar into Bangladesh. Now, the preliminary examination is seeking to establish if there is enough evidence to merit a full-blown investigation. Now, the ICC judges said that despite Myanmar not being a member of the court, the jurisdiction of the court holds because part of the alleged crime of deportation happened in the territory of Bangladesh, which is a member of the court. Take a look at this report.
Another key chapter in the Rohingya refugee crisis. The International Criminal Court in The Hague will now investigate Myanmar's Rohingya deportations. Though it is only a preliminary examination, it can lead to a formal investigation by the ICC and then possible indictments. A statement by ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda said the initial probe will likely focus on alleged coercive acts that possibly led to forced displacement of Rohingya Muslims, deprivation of fundamental rights, killing, sexual violence, destruction and looting. While Myanmar has not signed up to the ICC, the court's judges ruled 2 weeks back that the court still has jurisdiction over any alleged crimes against the Rohingyas because Bangladesh is an ICC member.
It decided that the court could exercise jurisdiction on the alleged deportation of the Rohingya from Myanmar to Bangladesh as at least one element of the crime of deportation, which is the crossing of the border to Bangladesh, took place in the territory of Bangladesh.
The ICC's action comes after the United Nations investigators renewed their call for the investigation and prosecution of Myanmar's top military officials for genocide and war crimes. The report came 2 years after a UN Human Rights Council established an international fact-finding mission to investigate allegations of abuses in Rakhine State, where the Rohingyas are from. The UN panel gave its findings in a report issued on August 27th and published more fully this week on Tuesday. Though they were repeatedly denied visas to Myanmar, investigators drew on documentary evidence, satellite imagery, and 875 interviews over the course of 15 months. The report submitted before the UN Human Rights Commission by the 3-member mission contained the account of the findings of its 15-month examination of the situation in 3 states in Myanmar, Rakhine, Kachin and Shan. The report said Myanmar's military carried out mass killings of Rohingya with genocidal intent and called for Commander-in-Chief Min Aung Hlaing and 5 generals to be prosecuted for the gravest crimes under international law. The mission also faults Myanmar's civilian authorities led by Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, saying ignorance on their part was effectively impossible.
Democracy requires a government that accepts scrutiny. It depends on leadership that actively combats hate speech and harmful misinformation. It requires a legal framework that guarantees these rights for all without discrimination. In this regard, the democratic transition in Myanmar had barely begun, and now it has come to a standstill.
However, Myanmar authorities deny the allegations, calling the panel's findings as one-sided.
The one-sided report of the FFN has only served to strengthen the government's concerns. Not only is this report detrimental to social cohesion in Rakhine State, it also undermines the government's effort to bring peace, national reconciliation, and development to the entire nation.
With this backdrop, the ICC in The Hague, that was set up in 2002 to investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity, has taken over the investigation. There was a big question mark over ICC's jurisdiction into the matter, considering that Myanmar is not a party to the ICC statute. However, ICC's pre-trial chamber recognized the court's jurisdiction over Myanmar's alleged crimes against humanity, saying the alleged crime of deportation was completed in the territory of Bangladesh, which is a party to the ICC statute. However, Myanmar has dismissed the ICC's claim to jurisdiction as meritless. Under these circumstances, it will be interesting to see what ICC's preliminary probe into the Rohingya deportation leads to, and what will be the impact of such an investigation, considering Myanmar's position that it was under no obligation to respect its rulings. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And that's all in this edition of World Panorama, but we'll leave you with this interesting news on a 67-year-old reptile enthusiast in France. In over 2 decades, the herpetologist has amassed 400 reptiles in his house in a village on the banks of the river Loire, including some of the nature's most maligned species, from rattlesnakes to tarantulas. So take a look at these visuals as I take your leave. Thanks for watching.